WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. For those of you keeping track at home, we did sports around here for a long, long time. And when I did, this guy was a major part of everything we've done around here at WNST from the time before WNST was here. Alan McCallum actually drove down the road when WNST was WKDB as my baseball guy. And Alan, first things first, man, welcome in. I'm going to ship you some Taharka ice cream. They're one of our newest sponsors. I have the empty pints here. What's your favorite ice cream? Do you have a favorite? Anything without cheese, I know. You're not averse to milk, though, right? Just cheese that you hate.
No, let me tell you something. I have, since, I guess, early April, I now have a giant freezer. So I have plenty of room. And Taharka Brothers is amazing. And there's only one ice cream, honey graham cracker ice cream. If I could only have one for the rest of my life.
But here's the problem, Al. It's empty. I'm holding the cart. This is it. I ate it all, and it's going to be. This will tell you all you need to know.
Your big tease is what you're telling me.
Listen to me. We have 14 pints of this, okay, in the freezer right now. We have demolished the dead soldiers here are honey graham, pistachio, chocolate love, and wake and bake, and we have everything in the freezer right now. We have machi mocha, the tea, green tea. We have the mint chocolate. My wife loves the key lime. It's not my thing. She loves the roasted strawberry because it's tart. It's not my thing. But the honey graham is the first to go. To your point, like it's always going to be the first to go. And their eggnog, and they had like leftover eggnog in the back of the freezer, and they're like, dude, take all you want. And I'm like, I don't have the big freezer like you and my son, right? So I took like 3 or 4. He's like, take all 14. I'm like, I don't have room for all 14. He's like, well, it's going to go to waste. I can't sell it yet. And I'm like, I brought it home. It's the best eggnog ice cream Dude, it's June and I'm eating eggnog ice cream. Do you know how excited that makes me? You know me, man. So
I haven't tried their eggnog, but I will look forward to the opportunity whenever.
Well, I'm going to get you some honey graham now that I know you're on the honey graham. And there's a lot of debate about this. We've had a lot of key lime eaters, my wife being one of them. You know, they make that argument. But I will tell you, the eggnog, the pistachio, and the honey graham, those are my flavors. Enough of pluggage, man. Look, I'm not wearing a hat. I'm in pandemic mode. I did shave nice for you. I'm going with the soul patch to honor Springsteen. And I know you followed my music month last month. And, dude, you and I have done 4 hours together many, many times. We've been friends for 25 years. I mean, the protests that are going on right now, and given the fact that I'm not black or white, right? Like, my father came off a plane from Venezuela in the 60s. I'm an immigrant. I'm a mutt. I was raised by an Archie Bunker family. Father from Scranton, Pennsylvania, right? Complete North coal mines in 1919. Mother from South Carolina, in Abbeville, South Carolina, 1919. I mean, I've had this weird. I am an American, right? Like I am this weird mix of German, Italian, Hispanic, weird roots, and no family really to speak of. That's blood that I'm near adopted. The whole thing, right? And I don't know that we've been able to have the kind of conversations that we've been having on social media, and we usually talk about baseball, and you know what? The baseball thing's so effed up right now that would be 4 hours, you and me, right? Like you and I were talking, we almost met in the first strike.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I mean, just the baseball thing. When they finally decide to play, God only knows how much baseball how much time they'll have to play it. I thought it was an interesting idea to have this be an experimental season to see what works and what doesn't. National League DH, geographic divisions,
relief pitching,
round robin,
the weird relief pitching. That's going to be from a strategy and a tactical standpoint. Just trying to play along with the new rules would be like learning a new card game. You know, like some sort of twist on gin rummy or something where, you know, 8s are wild or something and you have to play it that way. That's the pitching thing is I still don't really – I haven't gotten a grasp of that or what the flow of that's going to feel like, right?
Nobody has. It's one thing to sort of read the rules. It's another thing to see how it plays out. So, you know, they had some interesting things, but as time clicks away, and look, I work in an industry that is that's not going to come back anytime soon. Sports is certainly an industry. Whether it comes back, it may come back, but it would be insane to have fans there. So, I mean, there are a ton of things that are going to keep this from being what everyone would hope it to be.
Which is just, boom, we're normal. Let's go back to the beach. Here we go. It's sunshine. And that's not the reality of where we are. Protest or elections or, whether this president goes into his bunker or whatever happens. I mean, I'm sincerely concerned about the protest and COVID in the next couple of weeks, given what I saw in Philadelphia. And Alan, it's been off the charts inspiring, right? And I'm sort of half kidding around by wearing my protest shirt right now. I'm just another very unimportant Baltimore baseball fan, and I'm wearing my Orioles shirt because that is our relationship and the basis of our relationship. But our friendship over 25 years and the conversations you and I have had off the radio that weren't, made for the radio about race and about Obama and about Trumpism and about where we're headed and about the heinous things that you've read on my timeline over the course of time from people who are listeners of mine who write with their names next to things that are so patently offensive to me. So to the point where I have literally thrown them off my page because they're not allowed in my pool anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Urinating in my pool is water we all drink in social media. And I am fascinated by how many racists I've served media to. And whether it's some sort of soft-sided, veiled racism or overt, I will come on your Facebook page and offend everyone in the space. I am astonished by how many people, Alan, can be our age. I'm 52. How old are you? You're a couple years younger than me, right? You're like my wife's age, aren't you?
I'm 47.
You're my wife's age. You're born in 73 or 72?
72.
My wife was born in 72. So you're my wife's age, right? So I am astonished. I'm just astonished that people can spend 50 years on the planet in a city like Baltimore, in a state like Maryland, and literally not have a friend of another race. Because if you did, you wouldn't have them based on the things I see posted. To think to myself, how isolated has your world been that you're making black jokes or whatever you would call that in the face of the world, in front of everyone with your name, your employer, your friends, your family, and have everyone titter, do a thumbs up, and think, yeah, that's cool. That works for me. I know you've seen it, and I know how angry you are about it, and I've read how angry you are about it, and you should be. And I want to give you the oxygen to say whatever you're here to say because I think I've said enough.
Well, Nestor, I mean, you say that, but I mean, people. I know people of color in this country get that all the time. The friend that makes an off-color joke, and it seems funny until you dig deeper into it, and maybe you never heard that friend say something like that before, but you sort of suck it up and smile about it, or at least it used to happen, because that was something you encountered on a fairly regular basis. I mean, it's an amazing thing because the collective love for a team like the Orioles or the Baltimore Ravens brings an incredible cross-section of people together.
Or music, you know what I mean? Or,
absolutely.
These are the things, and I'm thinking to myself, have you never had a black or anybody different than you? Have you ever had a teammate? Have you ever had a workmate? Have you ever had a schoolmate? Have you ever had a friendship, had a huddle, had a lunch, had a beer? I'm just astonished at the division. I mean, I really am. I mean, and maybe you're not. And it's really
having common interests and really understanding what a person's life experience is are two very different things.
Meeting at the ballpark. We can all meet at the ballpark. We go different directions when we leave, right?
And you can talk about, you can spend 4 hours talking about the intricacies of baseball or who was the better center fielder and then maybe that dovetails into, oh, you like Star Wars, or you like,
or how about this? How about
Friends
this?
on TV.
A white guy whose favorite player was Frank Robinson, or a black guy whose favorite player was Cal Ripken, or the thing for me with sports. So, Alan, I started doing this in 1991, right? And the 58 Colts and the 66 Orioles, and I know we lost John Miller, pitcher John Miller of Edmondson High School, one-time radio mate of mine and Don Moeller back at one of our anniversary shows. I think you were at that show the night that Dave Winfield walked in, if you remember that at the barn.
Yeah,
he was with us. Sure was. Those athletes of that era, right, the 66 Orioles, of which my cousin was a part of, it's the reason I'm here, right, and the 58, 59 Colts, had incredibly rich stories about race in that era and what the 68, 69, the Nixon period, the Kennedy, the Martin Luther King, that period, what that represented and where Lenny Moore was in his life, right? Where Art Donovan was in his life, where Johnny Unitas was in his life, where Brooks Robinson or Jim Palmer or Luis Aparicio, right? Bringing his immigrant cousins over to Timonium to procreate and, be manure stirrers on the radio for 3 decades here in Baltimore. But talking to those people and knowing the experience of a Big Daddy Lipscomb, and you can Google that and read up on whatever that was, murder, tragedy, as told in the news. And Lenny Moore, many, many times on our show, has spoken about what it was like to come to Baltimore in the late 50s and be a football player on Sunday and just be an African-American citizen the rest of the week. And Frank Robinson, and when I did the roots of this, and the roots of my own lineage and my own family pathway to America in the 60s, with Aparicio being on the back of the nameplate of Luis. In Chicago, he didn't get help from Bill Veeck to bring relatives. The Orioles and Jerry Hoffberger and the people that were involved in running the Orioles, this was a refuge for Frank Robinson and for Luis Aparicio, because we all know Frank's history in Cincinnati and the history of Cincinnati there and the racism. And Luis, it was more about Chicago and Bill Veeck not wanting to pay him to be a star and to be a major attraction to sell tickets on the south side of Chicago. And he never got paid, and he hated Bill Veeck. And when he got here, Bill Veeck, was no longer there, and the Orioles helped him bring people like me here. So
sure, but you say that, but I mean, there are all kinds of stories about when people were happy that Frank came to play for the team, but and trying to find a place to live, he was shut out, and it took Brooks going with him to allow those things to happen. So Baltimore became that, but it didn't start out that way for those players. And there are all kinds of stories. I mean, meeting Frank Robinson and Reggie Jackson and players that played in the 60s, sort of the second generation of black players after the Jackie Robinsons and some of the players that came first, who, for some, were happy to have the opportunity, and Jackie sort of paved the way. But in the next generation, when the Frank Robinsons and Reggie Jacksons felt they deserved an opportunity to play and didn't want, and as the world was beginning to change and wanted and demanded that kind of respect.
Well, and Kurt Flood being an African American, right? Kurt Flood being an African American that walked against the owners was different than Steve Carlton doing it, right? Literally.
There are all kinds of stories about people say, "Oh, well, that guy's angry. That guy, you don't want to talk to the guy. He's mean." Well, they had to be hard. They had to be prepared for the kinds of hatred that would come. And, it's great. He hit a home run. Fabulous. But you didn't see what was happening off the field. So they were preparing.
Well, Hank Aaron, the stories of what he endured on the chase for Babe Ruth, right? I mean, and that's 73, and that's Atlanta, and that's all of that, and all the players of that generation endured that, and many of them are still around, and honestly, many of them have joined us on the air, right? We talk about Dave Winfield and all that. Dave Winfield came up in the late 70s, right? So all of it has touched all of it, and baseball and race. Alan, that's probably the one thing where you and I have talked about race, right? Because I've been to the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame, or library, I would call it, out in Kansas City, and we have talked about your involvement out in Owings Mills with the wing of a library in a Hall of Fame that sits out in Owings Mills. You and I have visited it together. That has been one place where Ken Burns tells the history of race in baseball, and where we fly a flag in America for Jackie Robinson and say we fixed it, right? I mean, that would be the narrative, right? That's when we fixed things back in back in the late 40s. We let Jackie in, and then everything was cool after that. But it really isn't cool.
But it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't really cool.
It was the first step of so many, even before Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement of the 60s. I mean, Jackie in many ways was the first shot, and there was no better ambassador. But ultimately, I think everyone would accept that it shortened his life. The amount of stress and toil to be the first, and he couldn't speak until after his career was over, in which he spoke a lot. But it was important what he did, how he did it, because he had to be seen as an ambassador with dignity, grace, not just talent, and the ability to endure that kind of hatred so that people could accept him. And that's the beginning. There are so many martyrs for what needs to happen in this country. And I don't think we're at a point where people want martyrs anymore. If George Floyd is seen as, it goes down in history as a martyr, and that seems to be headed in that direction, the revolution is supposed to follow. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about enlightenment. I'm talking about the willingness to look at yourself, look at this country, look at the internal struggles that we have, and realize that baseball's a great analogy. I've said to you, and I've said on the air many times, the greatest thing about baseball is that it's an individual sport, but it's played within a team concept. This country didn't get where it is now, by not being connected to its past. Everything that's happening now started hundreds of years ago. And it's for so many people, well, I didn't own a slave. What's the problem? Well, that's not how it's connected. Our society is ingrained with the ideas and the mapping of people who did own slaves trying to maintain a level of authority and power over the populace. And it's built into this country. And so many people ignore that on a regular basis because they don't see how they're connected to it, because they don't have to, because you don't have to look at the underlining of a story if you're living it and it's going well for you. If at every turn the doors are closed, if at every turn you're on the downside of the opportunity, if at every turn you're waiting for someone's foot to be off your neck, then it's a much more important and imperative thing to look at, how did we get here? Why is this happening? This is not by accident. Black people aren't dumber. They aren't more violent. They aren't more apt to commit crimes.
And they love their children too, by the way.
Absolutely. The society is structured to work in certain ways for certain people. And it's easy to ignore that if you don't have
access
if it works for you. It's easy to ignore it if you have access and if it works for you. If it doesn't, then the questions need to be asked. And then the people that are in a situation where they don't have to ask questions look at you and say, why are you always about that? Well, I'm always about that because that's what my life is. take a look at my life. I will say this. There is a TED Talk with a gentleman from England who was talking about Brexit and was talking about not understanding the perspective of those who were angry about immigrants coming into the country, and how there were swaths of this feeling in certain areas of the UK, and realizing that he had never really gone to those places, didn't know them, didn't understand them, and then in the process of trying to, came to realize that for a lot of people in those areas, they only knew a certain perspective. They had never had exposure to people of different cultures, of different ideas. So it's very easy to be insulated with a point of view.
Well, and I think the purgative point of all of this would be like in the 70s, what the word foreigner meant. Oh, he's a foreigner. He's not from, and my father was a foreigner, right? So, part of that was always my father had an accent and all of that, and seeing how people responded to that in the 1970s, where just being from some other place or some other way in my neighborhood made you an outsider. And that was true of Archie Bunker's Dundalk in every way. It just wasn't black people or foreign people. It was rich people. It was people unlike you, right? So I certainly grew up in an environment where if people weren't like you, you were taught they're not like you. So be aware, be wary, be fearful, but that was taught to me as a 5-year-old to not talk to strangers too, right? Like we make all of our kids afraid of things, right? Like except Santa Claus, right? And then we find out our parents were lying to us about that, but that's another story altogether. That's Psych 102. That's the room next door. But yeah, I mean, I remember as a kid being, don't talk to any. It wasn't even white or black, or it was just don't get in the car with that strange man, or whatever. I think we all have a little bit of that. My parents are a little different too because they lost a child a couple of years. I mean, I was a replacement child. They had a child who drowned, so my parents were probably a lot more. Then I cut my finger off when I was 3 on a lawnmower. So my parents were probably a little bit more wary of things. Although I turned out okay, my fears were well founded. But I do think about what I was taught when I was 8 years old and how much my gringo family disliked my Hispanic family because they were different. They spoke. They stayed up all night listening to merengue and playing poker, and they ate their steaks rare, and they played their music too loud, and they all spoke Spanish, and and all of that, right? It was a different thing to be in Northeast Baltimore and have an outdoor Hispanic-only party in 1975. We were the only Hispanic people we knew, literally, There was no place to go to. If you wanted to go to a market to get Hispanic vegetables in 1975, my dad would put me in the Torino. We would drive to D.C., because D.C. had Spanish markets, literally, where he could get like plantains. You couldn't get a plantain in Baltimore in 1975, Alan. Believe me, we tried,
So I grew up in Randallstown, and about three blocks away from Hebdale Elementary School.
You went to Milford, though, right?
I went to Milford Mill High School. I went to Hebdale Elementary School. I went to Woodlawn Middle School. We were the first black family in our neighborhood. My parents moved
here
a month after.
Give me a year that they moved in.
1972. They moved in a month after I was born.
Wow.
They lived in the city, and I know at least partially part of it was the concern that they had a daughter. My sister's 5 years older than me, but there was concern that access to things for a young black son might be
your sister was born
complicated.
before the riots then, huh? Your sister's older than me.
She was born in 1967.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
Okay. We graduated together then. I was an 85er. Okay, good.
She was born in the heart of a lot of things, as you were. But they were concerned about what kind of things I would be exposed to in the city, at least partially. That was a decision to move. But, when we first moved in, the area was in a lot of ways an extension of Pikesville. There were a lot of Jewish families. It was all white. And then over the course of my childhood, I watched the entire neighborhood change to virtually all black. in a period of about 10, 12 years. And it never occurred to me at the time what was happening. But as black families were making a push for the first time into the counties, and the reason for that is that as houses and counties and suburbs were being built into America.
Well, they were part of the flight of why nobody's in Baltimore, because people went to the county for cheaper this, better that, and and safer this, right? Like in any era. I mean, that's been the story from 1948, white, black, and other white, that people leave the city because of schools, crime, and taxes, literally.
Banks
maybe not in that order.
Would not loan to contractors who were building houses if they sold to black families.
That's called redlining. Period.
It's called redlining. They would not allow that. They would not allow that to happen. And for the people that were buying the houses, part of the loan agreement was that you could not sell your house to black families. Now, that was not on the books as law, but that happened for 30, 40 years as the suburbs in America were being built. And then there is investment in buying a home and having a house, and you can borrow against that. And a lot of wealth in America came from people getting relatively inexpensive loans to buy homes in the suburbs, having the value of those homes grow over the course of generations, and being able to borrow against that to do other things like go to college, create businesses, give loans to your kids so that they can go off and do those things. And if you're a black family, you don't have access to that, then you don't have those advantages. So black people were largely forced on top of each other in the cities while the expansion happened. And then as people pushed out into the suburbs, and then white families went further out into the suburbs. Even if you want to say that at that point there was opportunity, they were 40 years behind, 30 to 40 years behind in having access to that. And not only that, if you look at the property values for black neighborhoods as opposed to white neighborhoods, it's astronomically disparate. Ultimately,
I just want to reset. Alan McCallum is our guest. We're usually talking baseball. We're obviously talking race and protest and Baltimore history and West Baltimore history and East Baltimore. So keep going. Go ahead.
So, as you hear over the course, so I'll never forget as long as I live, during debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And Mitt Romney spent a lot of time during his campaign talking about everyone in America starting a small business and generating wealth. And at one point, the question came, where do you get the money to start your own business? And he went on for a bit, but ultimately his answer was, if you don't have it, ask your parents for it. And it was an incredibly telling moment. And look, there are poor white people, there are poor black people. We can have a discussion about what race actually is and then what function it performs in America. But certainly the percentages of black people having access to that kind of money is significantly lower in this country. To have a presidential candidate say that spoke so much to
the fact that he hasn't been to the grocery store lately.
A complete misunderstanding of what role money plays in this country and who has it and who doesn't, and what that means you have the ability to do. And look, I said this in a post I put up recently. I've had privilege through my whole life. I've had access to things that a lot of people haven't. I am grateful for that.
Including the 1996 playoffs in Cleveland. So point that out.
I've been able to do a lot of things that people of all colors have not had the opportunity to. I'm aware of that. But I've also experienced things that I'm sure a lot of white people haven't, and it comes from being immediately identified as a minority. Ultimately, the difference the difference between access in America is not it's not by accident. It was engineered into this country. First, with slavery. Secondly, by all the things that happened after slavery. And certainly in the 20th century, it has been accelerated in the sense of how suburbs were built, redlining, and inherited wealth being collateral for the future creation of money and wealth. And that didn't happen 100 years ago. And this is, for me, this is so important. People have trouble conceiving of slavery. People have trouble conceiving of the Civil War. People have trouble conceiving of even the Great Depression. But this happened 50, 60 years ago. That's within the period of time that your grandparents lived.
Well, right? I mean, John Lewis and you know, the people that were involved that are still, I mean, Elijah Cummings until recently, right? So, you know, people that were a part of this, for sure.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you may have trouble conceiving of what happened 150 years ago, but
there's video of this.
To the idea that the way we live today, cities, suburbs, estates further out, that was engineered into this country 50 and 60 years ago within the lifespan of people you know and love. And it has been easily erased from most of the record books how and why that happened.
Alan, I want to take a break here. I want to do two segments with you. Alan McCallum is our guest, our longtime Oriole insider. I'm wearing my Oriole gear. We're talking about everything but baseball because, you know, as you know, Alan, they ain't playing no baseball right now. So we'll step out and take a break. We'll have more with Alan McCallum, who's been my longtime baseball insider. And we're back for more. WNST.net, AM 1570. Keep it calm, staying local, and always Baltimore positive.